hope that you brought your Bible, and if you did, you'll open it up to Luke 14 as you see there on the slide. That's where we'll be in just a little while. Luke 14. I don't know if you've paid attention, but it's bowl season in college football. Did anybody know that besides me? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the playoffs are happening and all of that, yeah. Have you noticed that if you were to buy a ticket to go to one of those events, that if you sit up there by the lights, that they're expensive, but if you sit down there by the field, you just mortgaged your house. The best seat is expensive, isn't it? And people want the best seat. And the best seat's not up there by the lights where I sit. The best seat's down there close to the field or the court, maybe the 50-yard line or mid-court in a basketball game or home plate in a baseball game. It's next to the stage in a concert. And at the church building, it's in the back. At the parking lot, you know what the stores look like this time of year. We drive and we circle and we circle and we circle, and we're not circling to find the parking spot that's out there by the road. We're trying to find somebody pulling out right up there by the entrance, right? We want the best spots. Well, I'm talking about something similar to that this morning from Luke chapter 14. We're talking about the best seats here in Luke 14. And before I read it, I want to set the context, the part that we're not going to read. According to chapter 14 and verse 1, Jesus has come to this home of one of the Pharisees by invitation. He has been invited to this feast. And it's one of these meals in which the religious elite, the top dogs, have all been invited. You know, everybody that's important has been invited. And there's somebody else there that evidently has been invited that... I read in the way I read the text, it sounds like they invited Jesus and this other person to kind of set up a possible bad situation. And so there's a person there that has what the Bible calls dropsy. And the dictionaries tell us that this is a disease that was it was where there was an accumulation of fluid in some part of the body that was quite painful. And so this individual just being there, moving around and things like that would have been experiencing a great deal of pain. And see, here's kind of the setup. To these Pharisees, the leaders of the Jews, well, you can't heal somebody or help anybody on the Sabbath. They've added that to God's law. You can't help anybody on the Sabbath. And they know who Jesus has been and what he's been doing, and so they think that if he shows up on this Sabbath for this meal and this guy also shows up, then he heals him, and then he loses some influence. And so Jesus sees him and, over their known objections, well, he does heal him. He does heal him. And, they don't complain right then. Perhaps they're waiting to get everything that they need in order to really expose the situation. But they kind of let it go. And it's kind of a tense situation. And then all of these leaders of the Pharisees start trying to find their place at the table. And Jesus is watching this. And everybody's trying to get the best seat. And Jesus uses that opportunity to teach. So I want to read it. Luke chapter 14, beginning in verse 7 down through verse 11. So he told a parable to those who were invited, when he noted how they chose the best places, saying to them, when you're invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him. And he who invited you and him come and say to you, give place to this man. And then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you're invited, go and sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, go up higher. And then you'll have glory in the presence of those who sit at table with you. For whoever exalts himself will be abased, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Now, you probably already recognize that what Jesus is saying here is the opposite of what we're shown in our world, right? It's the opposite of what we're supposed to want in the world as far as success is concerned. But I think the lesson is certainly applicable to us in our lives today, and I want to bring it out. You've already seen the title of the sermon. The title is Learning to be Little. And the idea that I'm trying to present here is what Jesus says about humility, what we're supposed to be in His service, and what God expects of us, and how we can best honor Him. So I want to start with this point. He's talking about the best seats, and he says the best seat is the lowest seat. Look again there at verse 10. Let me read it again. And I'll actually read it a couple more times because I really want to drive this point home. Verse 10. But when you're invited, go and sit down in the lowest place so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, go up higher. And then you'll have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you. So it's the lowest seat is the best seat. That's what he says here. And I think it's very obvious that Jesus has something more in mind than just which seat you sit at the table, don't you think? I mean, the context that I set a while ago is about struggle and importance and signifying how important I am. And now he sees them jockeying for these best seats. And he says, you know, those seats are kind of symbolic of a problem that you're having with attitude. A problem you're having with who that you think you are. And in fact, verse 7 told us that this is a parable, so he's trying to teach them. We sometimes say that this a parable is a heavenly, an earthly story with a heavenly meaning, so he uses something here that we understand to teach us something about eternity that we don't understand. And that's kind of what's happening here. Jesus is using this illustration of what was happening with them physically to talk about something more important, and that's humility. And the lesson was there in verse 11. Notice he started with that connecting word, for. That's a conclusion. Here's the parable, and here's what he's trying to say. Whoever exalts himself will be abased, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. You want to try to force yourself into something with God? You're going to lose. On the other hand, if you allow God to use you because you are humble, you're going to be blessed. I don't know that everybody was taught the same way that I was, but I come from a generation that when we were growing up and we were learning sports, especially learning to play sports, one of the things that our coaches frequently taught us was it really doesn't matter whether you win or lose as much as it matters how you play the game. Anybody taught that besides me? Here's the thing. Those are empty words because that's not what we teach by our actions. Our actions, for the most part, in our society are that winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. It's the only thing that we will accept. Being first is the only acceptable thing. Second is less. That's what our society teaches. And so it doesn't matter how you play the game, it matters in our society how you win the game. And so you do whatever you can to win it. And Jesus said in Mark chapter 9 and verse 35, he said a similar thing to what our text said here in Luke 14. He said, if anyone desires to be first, he should be last of all and servant of all. That's not what our society teaches. You can't take a course in a college about business success and have them tell you what you need to do is shoot for the bottom. It's just not what our world says. God says if you want to be first, you go for last. That's backwards, isn't it? Yet it's not. It's not. Not if you're seeking to honor God. Because when I set myself first, what I'm doing is depending on me. When I set myself last, what I'm doing is depending on God. And what He wants and what I need is to learn to depend upon God. Number 2, Jesus said that best seat is also, this ought to be obvious, the least desired seat. Nobody wants to sit there, right? You remember when you were growing up in Thanksgiving or Christmas or even New Year's when all the families are getting together in one place and they've got the big table where the big people sit and the little people sit at the little table. Did anybody have that besides us? Yeah. Wasn't it awesome when you got to graduate to the big table? Because that made you kind of important? Well, you didn't want to sit at the least desired table. Go back to verse 10 again of Luke 14. He says, again, third time I've read this, but when you're invited, go and sit down in the lowest place so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, go up higher. Then you'll have glory in the presence of those who sit at table with you. They weren't competing for the seats at the little table. They were competing for the best seats because they thought that's what they deserved. There's a famous story that's told that happened during the American Revolution and in which there was a unit. There was a unit, and there was a officer in civilian clothes that rode past that unit that was working. And the job that they were doing was far too much for their capabilities. But there was a colonel who was on his horse, and he's just barking orders at these individuals in his unit trying to do this job, and they were not getting it done. And so this officer in plain clothes just asked him, he said, "Sir, why are you not helping them with this job?" And he said, "Mister, I'm a colonel." And so the officer in plain clothes apologized, and he got down, and he helped them do this job that was too much for them. This is a true story, by the way. And when he was done, he turned to this other man. He said, "Mr. Colonel," he said, "the next time you have a job that your unit has to do and it's too much for your unit to do, send for me. I'll come and help." True story. And that officer in plain clothes was General George Washington. I'm thinking that's probably a position that's above that colonel, aren't you? Yeah, most people today think like that colonel. They don't want to humble themselves. That's somebody else's position. They've earned their position. They want to be above that. Like these guests at this feast, they have worked their way up in Judaism, and they are important, and people need to know that they're important, and so they're going to sit in the most honorable seat, and they don't care if they've got to step on somebody to get there. See, that's our world. Our world says, whatever you have to do to be successful, no matter who you have to climb over to get there, you do it. It doesn't matter how you play the game, it matters that you win the game. And Jesus says, well, that's not a servant. We call it the law of the jungle. Eat or be eaten. That's not what Jesus calls us to be. And I think herein lies the problem. I think one of the reasons that we shy away from humility, that we don't in essence, want to sit in the least desired or the lowest seat, is because we don't think enough of ourselves. I think that we struggle with our own self-esteem, and if we're struggling with it, then surely you think as bad of me as I think of bad of me, and I need you to think better of me, and so I have to sit in the important seat. And then I'm reminded the attitude and life of Jesus, which I'll go to this text in a little, I'll read more of it, but just to get a little portion of it, in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 7, we're told that Jesus made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a servant and coming in the likeness of men. The Son of God gave up equality with God, took upon him the form of a servant, not just humanity, but a servant, a humble man, the creator of the universe. And that shows up in examples in the scriptures, not only in his ministry, but it shows up, for example, in Revelation chapter 2 and verse 9, when Jesus, through John, is writing back to the 7 churches of Asia. There in verse 9, he's writing to the church of Smyrna. And one of the things he says about the church of Smyrna is he says, they are rich. But they're not rich in this world's good. In this world, they have poverty. In this world, they have tribulation. He says, but you're rich. Surely he's not talking about their bank accounts, is he? No, he's talking about their relationship with God. And in spite of the humility of their lives, they have the blessing of God exalting them, and that's exactly what Jesus shows us. And as a Christian, you should never feel inferior. You should never feel superior. But you should never feel inferior. You should never have to build yourself up to look good, because the truth of the matter is, here it is, Paul tells us that we're all sinners. And as sinners, I don't have a standing before God without Jesus. So we stand before God. We can approach him in worship as a privilege, not because we are so very good, but rather because Jesus' blood saves us. Now, I don't have to praise myself if I have access to the blood of Jesus, do you? We are worthy because of the one who purchased us, so we follow his example, and we take the least seat. Number 3, the best seat is the learning seat. Now, that's not directly in the parable here, but I've drawn that from other places of the teaching of Jesus and other things found from the New Testament, because I do think it needs to fit into our thoughts here, because not only do we want to win, but we want to win now, right? We're a microwave society. We want everything to happen, and we want it to happen the way that we want it to happen, and we want it to happen when we want it to happen, which is always right now. I remember when I started preaching school, I didn't want to go to school. I wanted to preach. But nobody would hire me. I couldn't. In fact, even when I finished school, I was talking to different churches, and they'd say, you know what, we want somebody that's 35 with 10 years experience. And I said, I'm 25, and I don't have any years of experience. How am I going to get that at 35 if somebody doesn't hire me? The point is, we think that we're ready when sometimes we're not ready because we have to learn. I read an excerpt from the book, Well Done, The Common Guy's Guide to Everyday Success. It was written by Dave Thomas. Some of you would know who that is. Dave Thomas was the founder of Wendy's. Yeah, he wrote a book to help people learn how to be successful in life. And in that book, he writes about the fact that he didn't ever graduate from high school, but he has an MBA. But it's not an MBA like we think of it. That's not a master's of business. That's not what that is. No, his MBA, he said, was a mop bucket attitude. He said he learned how to operate his business successfully by learning how to mop. I think that's wonderful, and I think that's what the Scriptures teach us. What they teach us is that we don't have to mop something necessarily, but that's the kind of attitude we have, an attitude of servanthood. No job is beneath us, is it? No person, no job, no responsibility. So how about instead of being upset when things don't go my way and I'm important enough that you ought to do it my way, how about I get involved in helping make things better? Wouldn't that be a better choice? Yeah. How about if instead of being upset about a decision that leadership made or something like that, you pray as a servant for wisdom to be used in the work of the church? And in God accomplishing what He wants to accomplish. I guess the point I'm trying to make, I could have said this really simply by saying this. We've got probably, 170, 175 people here this morning. Wouldn't it be nice if there were 175 servants here? Because usually what happens is we get 175 who think we're all going to be the important ones. And there's going to be 169 here that's going to serve me. I appreciate the attitude of this church. I really do. So many times I have people come to me and they say, I want something to do. Help me figure out how to get more involved. I want to be more involved. And sometimes I can't do that. In fact, frequently I probably can't do that because I don't know everything that's going on and I can't keep up with everything that's going on. So I'm going to suggest something to you this morning. I'm going to suggest something. Find a floor that needs mopping. And again, I'm using that figuratively. This evangelism program that we become involved with, there's a role for everybody if you're humble enough to take the lowest seat. Maybe if you can't find something to do, the problem is you're looking up here and all the servant work is down here. And we're all supposed to be servant workers, right? Remember in Matthew chapter 25, Tom and I talked about this just a little while ago because we noticed as everybody was coming in that everybody sat on this side and there weren't that many on this side. I'm glad this side filled in a little bit. We were trying to figure out which was the right hand and the left hand at the judgment day that Jesus was talking about in Matthew 25. So I don't know which side you're on. But let me say this. The side that entered in, Jesus turned to him and said, you did this. And you did this, and you did this in service to me, and all the things that he talks about are the humble things. And the thing about it is, their attitude was, we didn't even know we did that to you. Because all they were doing is serving. They weren't trying to get credit. They weren't trying to be praised. They were just trying to serve. So Jesus says here, start humbly, and God will move you up. Start arrogantly, and guess what? God will move you down. Number 4, here's what the best seat is not. The best seat is not the lazy seat. And I know that that's the temptation here. If God doesn't want me to work my way up, well, then I'll just sit back and wait for Him and let Him handle it all. And you know, there were those that Paul wrote to in the church of Thessalonica who kind of got that idea about the second coming of Christ. They said, if He's coming back, I might as well just sit back and wait for Him. And he said, well, He might not be coming back tomorrow. So what you got to do is you got to stay busy serving today. And so I don't want us to get the idea that we need to become lazy. I don't need to aspire to anything. I don't need to seek to grow or build up my ability and talent to work for God even more so. Paul said in Romans chapter 12 and verse 3, he said, for I say through the grace given to me to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but See, we get that first part. Don't think yourself up here, but there's another side. But to think soberly, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith. There's no zero talent person. I don't need to promote myself up here, but I also don't need to get down here on the bottom and say, well, I don't have anything to offer. Because God has put me where He's put me because I do have something to offer. We all have something to offer. Let your abilities, your talent, your servanthood speak, not your mouth. The idea is that I will serve God and God will honor me. And it may never happen here, but it will happen in eternity if we shine His light. You remember the parable of the talents? Remember in the talent, you got that one man, he's the least one of it all, and he's got the one talent, and the text tells us he was afraid, and he went out and buried that talent, and then he was rebuked by the master when the master came up. He said, you wasted it. You wasted it. How many of us are wasting what God has given us? Because we're in the lazy seat. I'm going to read that text now I told you about a while ago, Philippians chapter 2. I pulled from it a while ago talking about Jesus, but if you want to turn there, I'm going to be in Philippians 2. And I'm going to start reading in verse 3. And what we're going to get is a description of Jesus. And in light of the things that I've been saying about humility and servanthood and being involved and all of that, I just want to take those things that are already in our mind and see how they fit with the example of Jesus Himself. So Philippians 2, I'm going to start in verse 3 and go down through verse 8. Listen to this. He says, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. We've seen that already. We've talked about that already, right? Okay. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interests of others. So humility, the lowest seat. Verse 5 now. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God did not consider robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a servant, and coming in the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross, and that is a mouthful. That's a mouthful. Paul says Jesus was the Christ. He was the king of his kingdom, and yet at the same time, in order to be those things, he was a servant. He was a servant. And here's what that means. He went to the cross to die to save me. I was saved by the servant. If I was saved by the servant, how can I expect to be in the high seat up here? And the same is true of you. So we're humble. We recognize our need for God. We recognize our limitations without God, and God saves us. That was the problem between Acts chapter 1 and Acts chapter 2. We had the Jews who thought they were here, and they rejected Jesus and killed him. And then in Acts chapter 2, they realized they'd been down here all along. And then they said, what must we do? And they were told how to be saved, and God exalted them. God exalted them. There's a story, again, a true story of John Brody. He was a quarterback for San Francisco 49ers many years ago. And John Brody, as a superstar quarterback, very high-paid quarterback for his day, also had the responsibilities on the team of holding the ball when the field goal kicker was going to kick an extra point or a field goal. So one time after a particular game, one of the reporters asked Brody, he says, what do you think about $1 million quarterback having to hold the ball for the kicker? And Brody said, well, if I didn't hold it, it would fall over. So he had the opportunity to say, you're right, I'm $1 million quarterback. They ought to get a peon out there to hold that ball. But he didn't do that. He said, everybody has a role and everybody has a job, and it doesn't matter who gets the glory. And that's true of our relationship with God. I'm not here to be praised by you or anybody else, and neither are you. We're here as humble servants of the servant who saved us. That's the life we should be living as Christians. So I don't know who you are this morning. I don't know what you're facing, but here's what I know. We're getting close to the end of another year. It's hard to believe this year is gone so fast. It's hard to believe. But here's what I know. Some who are here this morning began this year lost, and you're still lost. And the problem is not that you have not had the opportunity to obey the gospel. The problem is you think you know better than God. Oh, I know that's what the Bible says, but I just don't believe that. That's somebody who's clamoring to get the top seat. And on Judgment Day, if that's you, God will bring you down. But on the other hand, if you're willing to say, I'm going to do things God's way, that takes a level of humility that says, I know I can't save myself. I know I'm not ever going to be good enough. I will die to self, turn away from my sins, confess Him before man, be buried in baptism, and the blood of Jesus will wash away my sins and save me. He will exalt me. But you've got to be humble to do that. You've got to take it out of your own hands, put it in His hands. Tell you what will happen when you do that. Life will change. It'll change for the better. I'm not saying it's going to get easy. I'm not saying your problems are going to go away, but I'm saying you don't have to walk through them alone anymore. I don't know why you wouldn't do that. And if you're here this morning, you are a Christian, and yet you lost your way, you fell back into sin, the devil got a hold of you again, I think it's time to tell him, let go, and go back to your Father. So whatever